Hey, I'm back. So, you probably don't remember my very first video. It was about Alien Force's first 2 seasons, and from there I kind of got the idea to go more into Ben 10 lore and make another writing critique on Ultimate Alien Force. But in doing so, I kind of skipped over Alien Force Season 3, which at the time wasn't a big deal, but lately there's been a ton of talk of Season 3 again, and people are saying things like, oh, this season completely ruined Ben's character for the rest of the show, and was just boring and uninteresting, and I find all those critiques to be really weird. So for once, I'm going to try to be more positive and talk about what I loved in Season 3, and how I think it's actually better than Seasons 1 and 2 of Alien Force. Alright, right off the bat, I know everyone has a problem with the characters in Season 3 of Alien Force. More specifically, Ben. People seem to think that this new Ben is too arrogant and headstrong, and completely different from his original portrayal in Seasons 1 and 2. Now, everyone who says this is a gigantic hypocrite, because Seasons 1 and 2 of Alien Force already did this, and they did it worse. Ben was just suddenly different. The whole 5 years later thing is something the fans themselves made up to try to explain these discrepancies. We never actually get to see or hear why Ben has changed at all in Seasons 1 and 2 from how he was as a kid, other than just he did. Meanwhile, Season 3 goes out of its way to point out how different Ben is acting, and actively gives reasons for it. Ben became arrogant because he kept on getting praise after he defeated the hybrid, and got dozens and dozens of medals and accommodations that he now has in his closet. There's a super clear reason for it. Whether or not you personally like or dislike this version is in my opinion irrelevant, because there is a reason given as to why he's changed. See, the reason I criticize Seasons 1 and 2, Ben, for changing like this is because there wasn't really a reason besides the fans' whole 5 years later reason. And the thing about that is that that's not exactly how character writing works. Take, for example, Kid Goku. Now, imagine Kid Goku 5 years later, like how Dragon Ball Z does with its own time skip. Imagine if instead of the Goku we got in Dragon Ball Z that was still in line with his kid self but a bit more mature in some areas, we just got a Goku who was completely different. He hated fighting, he didn't like eating so much and only ate when he really needed to, and only really spent time with Chi-Chi and Gohan and never left his house. Would you accept that? Would you accept that this adult is the same as that kid you saw? I'm sure some people would say yes to that using the same logic, but the thing is that age is kind of irrelevant for a character in my opinion. Like, you have a character, you have certain traits. Age can affect how much he acts this way or that, but to completely change it during a time skip and never show us, the audience, these changes is in my opinion kind of a weakness. It doesn't help that the next series, well not the next series, but Omniverse, actually did have flashbacks that showed Kid Ben and how he sort of grew and evolved into the older and more mature Ben in Omniverse. And again, I'm not even saying Seasons 1 and 2 of Alien Force needed flashbacks. They just needed an explanation like Season 3 had, where characters all noticed how Ben was different and commented on it, and we got to clearly see the reason why. So again, perfectly fine to dislike Season 3, Ben, that's not what I'm trying to say. But I do think it's a little hypocritical how much people dislike this version when compared to Seasons 1 and 2, which did kind of the same thing, except they didn't even give a good reason for it. So in a way, Seasons 1 and 2 did it worse compared to Season 3. Now with that out of the way, let me tell you why I like this version of Ben so much more than what we got in the first 2 seasons. And in some ways, I even prefer this Ben to the classic Ben from the original series. This version of Ben has a pretty clear character arc. He starts off being more arrogant after his victory over the hybrid, and even attempts to hack the Omnitrix, thinking that he somehow deserves the power, or that it's some kind of test for him to gain the ultimate power of the Omnitrix, only for that to blow up in his face, and for Azimuth to literally say, "I'm very disappointed in you, Ben." This Ben has something to prove, unlike classic Ben and Seasons 1 and 2 Ben, and by the end of the season, he does prove himself. He makes the mature decision to destroy the Omnitrix, the thing he loves most in the world, to stop Vilgax from using its power to take over Earth. Now this is Ben at his most mature, his character arc completed, and while yes, it wasn't apparent in every episode, it was still there, and it was done pretty well in my opinion. See, much like classic, we see how arrogant he is episode to episode, so at the end of the season when Azimuth gives gives a speech about how disappointed he is in Ben. We get it. We've seen Ben at his most arrogant. We've been on this journey of him sort of devolving from his seasons 1 and 2 self, so it manages to hit a lot more. And that whole scene with Azimuth is just brilliant. Ben having to find the answer by looking back at his past actions and realizing what he has to do is just such a great scene. I also just love how his dynamic with Azimuth is so apparent here, and it actually manages to connect with Classic in a weird way, that we see Azimuth be enthralled by his 10-year-old self and somewhat disappointed with his more arrogant 15-year-old self. It bridges the two continuities in a way seasons 1 and 2 never did. It's also just more fun to see this version of Ben on screen, compared to the Alien Force version, which was just kind of a cardboard cutout of a human being. He has emotions, he has feelings, he talks to his friends, he hangs out with them, he feels like a teenager this time around, just going on adventures with his buddies, reminiscent to the classic series Ben. I think I've made my point on why I like this version of Ben so much, so now let me talk about my favorite character in Alien Force Season 3, Kevin 11. This version of Kevin fixes all my problems I had with this character in the first 2 seasons. See, in the first 2 seasons, Kevin just kind of goes through a ton of changes that don't feel natural. From being an arms dealer obsessed with money, to a sudden hero, to a boyfriend to Gwen, and a close friend to Ben. All these changes never really felt earned, and even though this season doesn't fix all of those problems, it does do a good job of making this version of Kevin feel more distinct from his original self, and bridging the gaps in some small but meaningful ways to make him seem more in line with his classic self, without completely changing his new version. At the very beginning of the season, Kevin gets changed into an amalgam of different materials, and his very first line is already a great callback to the classic show, "Oh no, I'm a monster again." Throughout the season, we see Kevin grapple with his insecurity over looking like this, and it's honestly pretty sad seeing someone who is so clearly a hero feel so bad about themselves just for the way they look. And unlike what Season 3 detractors want you to think, Kevin's not just this character who's upset about the way he looks. He's got a lot more going on, and he's also just genuinely hilarious this season. I don't know what it is, but his jokes always save every episode. Even the bad ones feel better because Kevin's there.
Crying? Oh, you do have a heart.
Yeah, that's what poor people have instead of money.
What is it with her and that dog anyway?
You guys found it on your first date, right?
I don't think that has anything to do with it.
Yeah? Keep thinking. You'll get better with practice. Don't think so, sir.
You're Kevin Levin. Didn't I tell you the next time I saw you in my courtroom, I'd chuck you into the null void?
No, wait, I can explain.
That's what you always say.
On top of being hilarious and having a genuine insecurity that makes his character more interesting, Kevin also has a really mature episode where he has to confront his father's killer. Hearing that, you may think you already know how that episode's gonna go. Kevin just forgives the guy and he goes to jail or something. But trust me, the ending really sends you through a loop, and it's just so much more mature than the first 2 seasons. I don't mean to keep harping on them, because that episode is more mature than a lot of episodes in Classic and Omniverse, and even Ultimate Alien Force as well. I directly compare it to seasons 1 and 2 though, just because I feel like people call that season mature and season 3 immature, but that episode proves to me the exact opposite. Season 3 knows how to be mature and be comedic at the same time, showing you don't have to sacrifice one over the other, and Kevin's character is the perfect representation of that. There's also little things like Kevin scamming people alongside Argent, figuring out how to bring Ben back in an episode where he was trapped in the null void by creating a projector out of a bunch of scraps, and tricking Charmcaster, allowing Gwen to get her powers back. All these things kind of help Kevin seem more intelligent and clever, which is what you'd expect from someone who had to survive on his own for so long outside the null void. Unlike in season 1 and 2, where it felt like they told us Kevin was clever but never really showed us. And now to wrap up this character segment, let's talk about Gwen. Now, this is the one character that's mostly stayed the same from seasons 1 and 2. I'll have more to say about her later, but for now I'll say that I enjoyed the fact that they actually tried to do something with this character. They gave her a rival in Charmcaster, had her start using magic again, had her and Kevin have a little subplot about the way he looks now, and in general, she was just more expressive, and she felt like she was actually part of the team this time, instead of kind of just there like she was in the first 2 seasons. But fundamentally, she kind of still is just there. Nothing's majorly changed about her character. So let's move on to one of my favorite things about season 3, the villain. Alright, one last comparison to Seasons 1 and 2. So in Seasons 1 and 2, you really didn't get that many one-off villains, because the show was so focused on the hybrid for most of the episodes. Because of this, I find it harder to enjoy Seasons 1 and 2, because for the most part, it's just the hybrid. The D and aliens are kind of just their henchmen, and the whole story about them being human never really gets brought up most of the time. So it's just Ben and company fighting a bunch of faceless, nameless aliens, whose ultimate plan is just to blow up the universe, which might not have been so disappointing if it hadn't been for 2 whole seasons of build-up where, again, these guys were the main focus. Thankfully, Season 3 avoided this by having a large variety of villains for Ben to fight against, and some of them were even villains we hadn't seen since the classic show, like Charmcaster, Vilgax, Animo, and Ghost Freak. Now yes, a lot of these villains were super inconsistent with their original personalities, specifically Vilgax, although Ghost Freak also has some major inconsistencies about him, but some of them actually had small little changes and tweaks that made them more interesting in my opinion, mainly Charmcaster. This time around, Charmcaster uses more manipulative means to get back at Gwen by influencing Kevin to bring her to a planetarium, where she then steals Gwen's powers. What I find really interesting about this is the line where she talks about how she had to work her butt off to get her powers, where Gwen was just born with hers. It makes her a kind of underdog, in a way, to see her have to work so hard to gain her powers and almost be jealous of how easy Gwen had it. It works in line with the retcon the writers put, and it even works for her classic persona a little, to be jealous of how quickly Gwen was able to use magic. She is one of the few characters that isn't completely changed in Alien Force compared to her classic self, and what little changes they do make actually do manage to add something to her character later on in Ultimate Alien Force, where we learn about how she had to leave her realm at a young age because her father was killed by an evil dictator, which is why she was so attached to Hex in the classic show, and probably why she grew up to be very cruel and evil later on in life. Alright, now it's time I address the elephant in the room, Vilgax. You'll be happy to know I'm not going to try and defend this version of Vilgax. Ultimately, I find the writer's choice to make him some kind of honorable warlord dictator just kinda strange, especially considering it's not even close to being accurate to his original depiction, so it really does feel like a whole new character showed up one day and called himself Vilgax. But I will play devil's advocate here and say that his very first episode was pretty good. It started the series off with a bang right away, and made this version actually seem intimidating and threatening, and his plan was reminiscent to the classic series Vilgax's original plan to lure Ben out, except this time he directly called him out, challenging him to a battle of galactic supremacy, where if he refused, the planet would be destroyed, and if he accepted, his identity would be exposed, and he could potentially lose to Vilgax and lose the Omnitrix. So, overall, not a bad plan. It definitely feels like something the classic series Vilgax would have pulled. Admittedly, after this version of Vilgax pretty much stops being intimidating, but he was good for at least 2 episodes, so I'll give him a pass. And even after those first 2 episodes, he managed to be more intimidating to me than the hybrid ever were. But yeah, that wraps it up for the villains. Like I said, there's more one-offs, but I mainly wanted to talk about Vilgax and Charmcaster, because they kinda represent the opposite sides of the same spectrum, meaning classic villains who were done well, Charmcaster's side, and classic villains who were done really badly, Vilgax's side. Most of the other Alien Force Season 3 villains can fall kind of into the middle of that, but yeah, that wraps up the villain side of things. Alright, so for powers, I really only want to talk about Ben, so I'll just briefly go over the things I liked about Kevin and Gwen's powers. I love the fact that Gwen started using the spellbook more. It just made her powers so much more unique compared to the basic Green Lantern effects they gave her. And for Kevin, being able to shapeshift and morph feels like something he should have already been able to do, but it's a good thing they added it now, so you know, better late than never. Alright, time for Ben. Now I know I said I wasn't going to do any more seasons 1 or 2 comparisons, but for this part to make sense, I kind of have to. But first, let's look back at the classic series. You guys remember that one episode where Ben got Master Control and beat up a cybernetically enhanced Vilgax and an Omnitrix enhanced Kevin at the same time using the Master Control function? It was a pretty beloved episode and showed just how powerful Ben could be when he had full Master Control unlocked. Now let's fast forward to the beginning of Season 1 of Alien Force. In it, we see the Omnitrix recalibrate into a brand new Omnitrix that doesn't seem to time out as often and allows Ben to switch between aliens on the fly. I'm sure most of you see where I'm going with this, since I already made this point in my very first video, but essentially, Ben is overpowered. See, 10-year-old Ben was single-handedly fighting Vilgax and an enhanced Kevin 11 at the same time with Master Control, so there is no way that even one of the hybrid would stand a chance against Ben. Even if we assume they're on Vilgax's level, which really wouldn't make sense, all things considered, they still wouldn't be able to be a match for a Ben who can switch between alien forms on the fly, not to mention the fact that this season he has 10 new aliens who are way stronger than his classic ones, who, if we go by what Dwayne McDuffie said, already imprint all their knowledge into Ben's brain the second he transforms. Even if every hybrid worked together to try to fight Ben at the same time, they would still lose. So when I see Ben get taken out in some episodes by characters like Darkstar, I just have to go, huh? How is he losing to these, joke villains? Seriously, what is Darkstar Vilgax level now? But even ignoring how basically OP Ben is and how he should realistically be able to handle the Season 2 plotline in a snap, there's one other problem this causes. That problem being a lack of tension. See, in the classic show, Ben was limited to just one alien at a time, and he could potentially time out at any given point, instantly adding a ton of tension to any fight he gets into. Because even if he's winning, you don't know if he's gonna time out in a few minutes and be completely helpless. And on top of that, sometimes the Omnitrix would mistransform Ben into a different transformation than what he originally wanted, which added yet another layer of tension, because you weren't sure if Ben was going to be able to use this alien in the correct way to get out of this situation. All of that is gone in Alien Force's first 2 seasons. Ben gets the right alien every time, he never seems to time out on screen, and he can switch between aliens. So really, the only way he could lose if he was a complete idiot, which this season goes out of its way to point out he's not. He thinks before he transforms this time because he's more mature. So really, every time Ben gets into a fight, I just kind of tune out. There's no tension or anything, so I'm just uninterested. Thankfully, Season 3 fixes this almost immediately by having Ben break the watch. See, now he can time out and he can mistransform. And while yes, he can still switch, it's not as useful now since it takes up charge away from the watch, making him have to think first before he changes. It instantly adds tension back into all the fights, because now you don't know if Ben will get the right alien, or if Ben will time out too fast, meaning he has to rely more on Kevin and Gwen to help him out, which lets us see their unique powers and gives them more screen time as well. People who dislike Season 3 seem to dislike this aspect of Ben especially, the fact that the Omnitrix broke and he starts mistransforming again. They claim he gets nerfed, but if anything, he was nerfed in the first 2 seasons. Again, remember, someone who can switch between aliens on the fly really shouldn't be struggling against someone like the hybrid. So yeah, if anything, I feel like this season kind of boosted him. He's able to take on his foes with just one alien at a time. That's pretty impressive and shows his creativity and ingenuity, much like how he was in the classic show. Overall, I just think Season 3 as a whole is so much better than what people give it credit for. Again, I understand people got attached to Seasons 1 and 2, but like I've been talking about, those 2 seasons changed just as much as Season 3 did, so I really don't feel like the hatred for Season 3 is justified. Oh, and one last thing. People have been saying that this season set a bad precedent, and that Ben's character began to change on the fly from being arrogant to mature like he was in the first 2 seasons. Let me just say that yes, this criticism can be applied to Ultimate Alien Force and Omniverse, but Season 3 didn't do this. Ben was pretty consistently arrogant throughout the season. So I don't really understand the bad precedent here, especially because, like I already talked about, there was a reason given why Ben had changed. So it's not like episodes go by and you're like, oh my god, where did this arrogant Ben come from? You know where he came from. But yeah, that's about it. Remember to like and subscribe.